Hey, everybody, let's talk about weed. Did I get your attention? I want to talk about marijuana today. We're going to talk about the efficacy of medical marijuana. We're going to talk about the viability of recreational marijuana. This is a timely topic for two reasons, two very important reasons. The first reason is this is on many folks' legislative agendas in the state of Wisconsin. I don't know if you noticed, a lot of you in the ballot last year, how many of you saw the, would you support a legalization venture? Yes or no, of which a majority, I believe, of Wisconsin residents said in the affirmative, yes. It's also poignant because for those that partake, there's a holiday coming up, which we can talk about. But here's the deal. There are no lukewarm opinions about this topic. It's very rare. You're either in one corner or the other, which is the case with most subjects in our country nowadays, now that I mention it. The Wisconsin Veterans Chamber of Commerce, now is not the time or place for us to tell you what our stance is on that. We want to arm you with information from all angles so you can make an informed decision. So the only thing that I ask is, as we enter into this discussion today, that you embark upon this journey with us with an open mind, no matter which direction, no matter which camp you're currently sitting in. Today, we have the expert of experts to talk about medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, and everything in between, and how it relates and pertains to the veteran and military family community. Todd Scattini is a Army veteran, high-ranking Army veteran, colonel with a distinguished career, international career, and we'll get into that a little bit. We could spend 2 hours talking about his career because it's incredible. Who has dedicated his post-service career and life to marijuana and marijuana-related advocacy. And his belief is that you cannot be pro-veteran without being pro-cannabis, at least from the medical end. And I'll let him clarify that. Look at this. I already got your attention. Dr. Jennifer Potts. Interesting. It is interesting. Was it when I started with let's talk about weed? Because I ruminated on that. Like, how am I really going to grab people with this important conversation? For like 48 hours, I spent time thinking about that. Dr. Potts, I appreciate you joining us for today's conversation. Folks, we're going to get into this. I'm going to shut up, and we're going to get talking right after this. Oh, motivated. I'm motivated. And notice, in celebration of today's conversation, the background color I chose was not orange, was not purple. It's green. Very excited. Folks, before I introduce our guest, also known as the hemp colonel, I believe, I should let you know our mission, our primary mission is your success. All right. So check out wiveteranschamber.org. I'm going to go ahead and just click this thing right here. That's going to scroll across the bottom. You want to follow us on all platforms? Of course you do, because we give you that valuable information. We bring that value to our Wisconsin veterans, military families, veteran business owners, veteran-friendly business owners, and just Wisconsin people. Veteran issues are people issues, right? You should connect with us. So check out our linktree.com/WIVetschamber and connect with us. We can be pals. So without further ado, happy to introduce my good friend, Todd Scattini. Buddy, how are you?
I'm great, Adam. How you doing today?
I'm doing very, very well. So it is, you are known as the hemp colonel. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's kind of funny. I know it's actually a funny moniker that I kind of gave myself, because when I started researching cannabis, I had several years left to serve before I could retire. And so I knew that I wanted to be part of this conversation, but I was also a guy who had a, top secret security clearance. I was in a sensitive position representing the United States as a defense attaché in a European country. And, but I wanted to be in the chat rooms. I wanted to be having this conversation. So I had this kind of like nom de plume of the hemp kernel. And I thought it was kind of goofy and cute, THC.
Yeah. Oh, I just got that. THC for hemp. Oh my gosh. Okay. I just got that. Wow. For everybody that's watching that got that long before I did, come on, I'm slow. Forgive me. So friends that are watching, if you have questions, comments, concerns, if you're on either end of the aisle or in between or whatever, we want to have a dialogue about this. So throw it, whether you're watching on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, doesn't matter. Throw something in the comments. Let's talk about marijuana today. But before we talk about that transition, you mentioned you were still in the service when you were like, I'm going to devote my career to marijuana advocacy. Just we could talk for hours, like I said earlier, about your career up until that realization point, or up until that point where something happened that caused you to have that realization. Just give us the cliff notes on your career, because it's an incredible career up until that point. You started out as a linguist, is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, I started out as an enlisted man when I was 19 years old. Like many folks, I graduated high school, and the first thing I did was fail out of junior college and wreck my car, and so I was like, well, geez, I got to go do something. So I enlisted in the Army. I became a linguist. I was a Czech and Slovak linguist, and then I got the opportunity to go to the West Point Preparatory School. Went to West Point. Majored in Russian and German there, was commissioned as an armor officer, served in 2 different locations. The first one was Fort Riley, Kansas, where I did my platoon leader time. And then I moved to Germany, where I commanded a cavalry troop of about 150 men, and 9 tanks and 13 Bradley fighting vehicles and all of that, super hoorah type of stuff.
That's kind of a departure from being a linguist. A bit of a transition.
Yeah, it was a big transition, but I went back because after commanding this cavalry troop, I became what is called a foreign area officer, which is a certain type of officer that the Army trains to focus on particular regions of the world. And because I had some European background already with my languages, I got Europe as my region, and that sent me to Germany, Czech Republic for a year, where I studied at their Command and General Staff College. I was an exchange officer to the Belgian Army. I was the Army liaison officer to the French Army for 2 years in Paris. I was the Army attaché in Bosnia for 2 years. And then I was the senior defense official and defense attaché in the country of Slovenia for 3.5 glorious years. The most beautiful country you could ever imagine.
So in other words, you had a pretty lazy career, a lot of sitting around, not really doing much.
Yeah, exactly. Well, along the way, though, I did end up doing something pretty cool. While I was in Paris, I was asked by name to serve as a senior special advisor to General John Allen, who was the commander of the International Security Assistance Forces in Afghanistan. Very cool. So for 6 months, I really shadowed him, and my job was to really prepare him for any meetings that he would have with international officials and anything else that came up, right? So I was part of this team called the Commanders Initiatives Group, and we were the ones who were supposed to think big thoughts for the boss, and think big thoughts for how can we end this war, or how can we maximize our participation in this war so it's better for everyone. And he asked me and a group of people one day to figure out a way to create an industry for Afghanistan, right? Because we had looked at 2 models. One was Plan Colombia in South America, and the way we addressed the drug war there, which was a complete failure, by just arming them to the teeth and fighting the drug war. And we know how that has ended up. And then the other plan that we looked at was the Soviets and the way that they had dealt with Afghanistan. Right. And so in both of those models, the plan was to, you pay these people so that they, don't get too wily, and that they're able to make their own government and make their own economy. And so the general said, neither of those worked. What resources do the Afghans have that we could utilize to base an economy on. So I knew they had opium. We had no use for that. We had they have really rare minerals that are in
Right.
all of our phones, and they sold the rights to those to China, so didn't have access to that. And then they had weed. And I'm a California kid. I grew up in Cali. My grandfather was a farmer out there.
Right.
I knew a lot about putting seeds in the ground. And so I said, well, why don't we kind of flip the script on the cannabis cultivation that they're doing there for hashish, that gets sent off into prohibition markets like Europe mostly. And the profits were coming back in the forms of IED and equipment and funding for the Taliban. So I said, why don't we flip the script a little bit and transition them to a hemp industry, right? With 25,000 different uses and 8,000 years of human history associated with it. And, the bonus would be when you're growing hemp around a product that you're trying to get high THC out of, they will crossbreed and the potency will decrease and the profits will decrease and everybody's happy. Well, no one was happy in the room that I spoke to. They all kind of laughed at me and, I was,
Oh, so
I was
you were
told,
you suggested this and were dismissed pretty much right away?
sure. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
But, this is 10 years ago and
Right.
we didn't know nearly as much. And I didn't know as much as I know now. But what I did recognize very quickly was that the roots of our prohibition in America, and this is our export to the world, by the way, right? Our prohibition was based on really racist, objectives to
Let's talk
truly.
about that.
Sure, let's do.
Let's talk about that because you mentioned 8,000 years of history of people using hemp
Mhm.
and the 40,000 plus uses for hemp. There
Mhm.
has to be a reason why we stopped using hemp. So
Yeah,
explain that? How did we make the transition? How did we get to where we are now with the kind of
sure.
the stigma around it?
Yeah, sure. So, long story short, it really became heavy in Western medicine in the 1800s when a gentleman named Dr. O'Shaughnessy brought it to the United Kingdom. It came then, and it had already been in the United States in the form of hemp, but actual medicinal use was really kind of brought to the West by Dr. O'Shaughnessy, and that later showed up in on the continent of North America as well. And up until 1937, medical cannabis was the second most prescribed medicine in the American pharmacopoeia, right? And you would have found it in any corner drugstore produced by Eli Lilly or Johnson and Johnson or any of these big pharma names that you hear today, and it would have been in the form of a cannabis extract or tincture of some sort that you could then consume. And it was widely prescribed for things like PMS or pain or colic in babies, a number of different things. I actually, my favorite medical cannabis usage of or historical book that I have recently was written by an 1879 graduate from West Point, a guy named General Carter, who at the turn of the century, after having been a cavalry officer and served on the Western frontier and receiving a Medal of Honor for his actions in Arizona, he wrote this book called Horses, Bridles, and Saddles. And so General Carter says, when you're going on a cavalry operation, you have to take care of your animals. You have to bring cannabis indica with you, right? And so, yeah, so it was
But it
being
was never
given
in leaf
to.
format then?
It wouldn't have been in a leaf, no, because the prescription was for a dram of product, and it would have been given to the horses who were having real stomach issues from eating native grasses and things like that. And so, and he also talks about its superiority to opium, which was also on the list.
I love your use of the word tincture. That's a very old-timey beverage sounding word, like marijuana tincture or marijuana elixir or some sort
It
of.
sounds very snake oily, doesn't it?
Very much so. But yeah, I think everything in an 1800s Western drugstore came in a form of an elixir or a tincture or a tonic. Yeah.
Sure. But I mean, we
Sorry,
still have them
complete
today.
derail.
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, we still have them today. There's so many methods of administration now that we've really expanded it and opened up the market. But a cannabis tincture one is a very predictable way to consume cannabis even today. And that's what it was used for then as well. That was kind of like the normal method of administration before we started rolling it out.
We had some good comments here. I just wanted to throw out.
Mhm.
We're going to get to this in a minute. Randy said, "How much revenue is being generated by states around us that have legalized recreational cannabis?" We're going to get there because this is really important because we're surrounded on all sides by folks that have either completely legalized or in the process of. I think in Minnesota's case, so. That's an attractive part is the tax revenue. And also Wes has a good comment. Thanks for your time, sir. Hemp and medicinal should be covered by insurance companies as these products are inaccessible and unaffordable for far too many. The insurance world and government still covers opioids, which are much more dangerous. So here you are mentioning in the early, centuries ago in the 1800s or whatever, we have medicinal marijuana being sold in corner drugstores as a safer alternative to opioids. And here we are with a parallel to that in our commons, like in our current society. I think that's really interesting. So what got you? So it was working with trying to build an economy in Afghanistan that, sorry, I'm fast forwarding here, but, did we have something else to say on the
We did,
prohibition
we
of
did,
hemp?
we did,
I don't want
sure.
to miss that. Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. Yeah, so I kind of wanted to get to like the racist roots of
Yes.
cannabis
Yep.
prohibition. It was brought about by, and I apologize if I'm repeating this for anyone, but there was a gentleman named Harry J. Anslinger who ran the prohibition department for alcohol, those who were enforcing the prohibition of alcohol between 1920 and 1932. And then 1932, we came to our senses again and recognized that the prohibition of alcohol was absolutely a failure and created awful, an awful situation for everyone. So they re-legalized it in 32, and his little group of prohibitionists was going away and getting underfunded. So he found, and he's just this famous racist, and he found this this concept of marijuana, right? And they began to call it marijuana, as it was called by the Central and South American and Mexican migrant workers who were coming into the United States. They were calling it that. So he took that moniker and started spinning people up about the awful things that marijuana was doing. And these awful things, by the way, and I'll quote, were things such as it makes Mexicans look twice as white women, and it makes darkies think that they're as smart as white people.
Those were
And
the exact words?
these are words that were used on the floor of America's Congress
Oh my
in
goodness.
1937 when Mr. Anslinger was trying to convince everyone that this product was deadly and dangerous and caused all kinds of reefer madness. So that for me was really one un-American and unacceptable. He did what Mr. Anslinger didn't know is that I was raised in a Mexican household. My stepfather is Mexican, and my stepbrother and stepsister, and the community that I lived in California was highly Hispanic population, and so that really kind of pissed me off. And then when the greed of it got into the way as well and affected American farmers, because we made one giant mistake and one mistake into an even bigger mistake when we prohibited hemp along with the production of cannabis as a medicine, right? So Mr. Anslinger, he collaborated with William Randolph Hearst, who is a massive media mogul, right? And who had paper industry, right?
Okay.
He had just figured out in the early 30s how to make really great paper out of hemp. Even though we've been doing it for centuries, we learned how to do it on a massive scale. But Mr. Hearst was really concerned that it was going to cut into his paper industry because, oh, by the way, just a few years earlier, a fellow named Pancho Villa had taken about 8,000 acres of Mr. Hearst's forestry in Mexico. And so I think he had an axe to grind with the Mexican population as well. And then just to add insult to injury, the chemical industry got involved with Dow Chemicals and other chemical industries that had just figured out how to make plastic out of dead dinosaurs, right? Out of petroleum products. So hemp was starting to break into their bottom line as well. You can see videos of Henry Ford actually pounding on a Model T Ford that he had created entirely out of hemp composite material and it wouldn't even
Really?
leave a dent. Yeah. And by the way, that vehicle ran on hemp oil. So so anyway, yeah, this plant was getting in the way of a bunch of people getting rich, and so they decided to prohibit it. And then that prohibition over 87 years has been applied so disproportionately to poor communities, especially communities of color, especially the Black community, especially the Hispanic community. And, for me, that was absolutely a travesty. So, my goal with my company is to really forward and push the relegalization of cannabis in a manner that it addresses a number of the societal ills that the prohibition of the plant created, right? That's social justice and social equity in the cannabis industry, right? We have to build this industry from the underground up in a fashion where it's really representative of the country that we live in. There are economic impacts, right? So when we took away the ability for our farmers to grow hemp, right? This plant that at one point in time, was the staple of American farming.
Right.
It is without this plant, we would not have been able to make the sales that brought immigrants to the shores of this continent. And we went and made it illegal. Are you crazy? So we took that away from the American farmer, and we took a medicine away from the American people at the same time. And
So it was,
yeah,
let me just ask a follow-up question. And Bill had
please.
some really good additional comments here. Bill Meisel, the American Legion and VFW both have openly endorsed medical cannabis. We're going to talk about medical cannabis and its impact on the veteran community. But then he also adds the Tavern League has a strong hold on Wisconsin for not allowing cannabis. And here we have, again, a very lucrative industry for our economy that is fighting tooth and nail, it appears, to prevent this from happening, much like the paper and fossil fuel petroleum industry did all those years ago. So you floated the idea of using hemp and marijuana to build a new economy and an industry in Afghanistan. And in the process, you learned all these things about the U.S. and the history of it, and then the racial implications and the inequity and inequality implications. And you're still in the service. You still have time left. So is it correct you decided at that point that you were going to become a marijuana and hemp advocate? How do you balance that while being a service member when it's completely illegal to do recreationally or otherwise as a service member, whether it's legal locally or not? You can't do it.
Yeah, well, what I learned is that reading a book wasn't illegal, and that I wouldn't come up hot on a piss test for watching a documentary. Excuse my language, but a urinalysis. But this
Operation
is
Golden Flow, I believe it's called.
Yeah, absolutely. This is for anyone who hasn't been in the military. This is how we judge a soldier's character by the content of their urine. We determine whether or not a person has the ability to lead soldiers or fight our nation's wars by metabolites that might be in one's urine. I think that's a bunch of BS, because what it takes is leadership to understand how your soldiers will perform in combat, and so this kind of goes against that anyway.
I agree.
As two men who've peed in a cup before.
Under close scrutiny, it's demeaning too.
Not the same cup. Exactly. It's absolutely demeaning. It's absolutely demeaning.
It's demeaning.
And it's real. Yeah. And so, I don't know how many
it's
times.
It's demeaning for the guy that gets tagged. For those of you that aren't familiar with this is the process in the military. At least it was in the Air Force. I would randomly get pinged. Randomly. Seemed to always happen after a vacation or a TDY. Strangest thing, I would randomly get pinged, and then I would have to go to take a urinalysis to make sure that I hadn't been experimenting with things that were prohibited for me as a military member. And it's a long line of people in and out. You take your urinalysis, you move on with your life. However, you are closely watched. At the entire process, somebody has to have physical eyes on that happening, on that going into a cup. And that person is usually someone in the military that's being punished for something. So not only do you have to go through the process of demeaning yourself to have an audience for that, but somebody on the other end has to watch that happen all day long. People don't volunteer for that. They get voluntold. So the whole process is demeaning. So I just had it for those of you that don't know, it's gross. The whole thing's gross. So I'm sorry. Continue where you were.
No worries. No worries. I don't know, where were we?
Yeah, I know. It's sidetracked. We were talking about your process of being in the military and how
Oh
you
yeah,
tiptoed
sure.
that line.
Yeah, so I mean, really, that time in Afghanistan, I was just all of a sudden I was blown away by this subject, and even though my home state of California was the first to legalize, they ironically the exact same year that I threw my hat in the air at West Point, my home state legalizes medical cannabis. You know, we were the first ones that took that courageous step, and I'm really proud of them, and I'm proud of the fact that it was veterans that led it, right? A veteran.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Dennis Perone was a veteran activist who served in Vietnam. He was in the Air Force. He was in the Air Force in Vietnam, and he really led this. And it was really because of the gay community at the time was suffering from AIDS so badly. And Dennis, who lived in San Francisco, his partner had just passed away, and he partnered with Jack Herer, the famous Jack Herer, and as well as a couple of other folks there that really pushed this forward after a lot of great work.
Interesting.
You know? Yeah. So no, for me, you know, I was just so taken by this particular subject that I knew I wanted to be part of the conversation and potentially part of the movement. And then I said, I want to be part of this industry. And so what I started to do was try to figure out how I could take the skills that I had developed in the military and apply them to the cannabis industry, right? And so my skills morphed into, over my career, into forwarding U.S. foreign and defense policy in foreign countries, right? So on behalf of the Department of the State and the Department of Defense. And so I wanted to really be able to represent North American cannabis IP and technology and things of that onto the European continent and onto other continents. And that's what we're doing now. That's kind of what the company has grown into, where we're bringing IP and technology under our umbrella that we can be able to, you know, license out to other folks. The other things that we do is we also we write applications for people to be a part of this industry. We focus specifically on minority communities. We focus specifically on women and on veterans, because all of those communities, I want them to have licensure and representation within this emerging cannabis industry. So we go a long way to do that through education, incubators, and things like that, like the ones we'll run in New Jersey, Illinois, and other states as they come online.
So is that a huge barrier to entry for somebody that wants to get into the cannabis industry? And I'm sure we'll touch on this as we kind of transition to talking specifically about Wisconsin, but you say you focus a lot on licensure and applications. I would assume that it's highly regulated. Is just getting a foot in the door in this industry a huge barrier?
It's huge. It's really difficult. The application process is very complex. It's very expensive in some states, right? So I'd like to dig into Wisconsin's program and the plan a little bit, because, you know, when you put $100,000 fee just to submit a license, that tells poor people you can't play. You know,
submit for licensure?
Yeah.
And that's in the state of
certain
Wisconsin?
States.
Well,
No. I don't know. You don't have any rules yet in the state of Wisconsin.
Right.
You guys got to get it legalized. You know, you got to get this. So I'm hoping to maybe give a few tips on how the program should look, or how it could look, because Wisconsin stands on the precipice of great opportunity right now, in that they could be the 38th mover for medical cannabis. And, you know, so you should have the opportunity to take in the best of the best, to understand what works and what doesn't work. You know, how do you implement a policy that gives maximum access for patients who need it? How do
And
you
maximum
also
economic opportunities for entrepreneurs and business owners too.
Absolutely. Yeah. How do you facilitate that, especially in those communities that may not have access to huge amounts of capital? How do you ensure that the black market doesn't continue to thrive?
Hmm.
Right. And that has a lot to do with taxation and access and things of that nature. So I can give some comparisons to Missouri if when we're prepared to talk about
Well,
different
let's talk
markets
about
and
it.
how the structures could be. Sure.
Let's talk about Wisconsin. I mean, so you made it through to the end of your career. You've become
Mhm.
a well-known advocate. You managed to stay out of trouble. Nobody gave you too much of a hard time for getting a foot in the advocacy door in your remaining years in the Army.
Mhm.
And so you've transitioned, become this huge advocate, and have really led the charge in a lot of places. And in particular, you mentioned Missouri. You've been doing a lot of work there. So
Mhm.
you see us, and you do work nationally and globally. And I would just encourage anybody that's watching right now. We do have quite a few viewers across platforms, which is really cool. So please throw your questions and comments out. We're getting some really great questions, really great comments. And Randy, we're going to get to your question here in a minute. And maybe that's a good segue point, actually, his question to talking about Wisconsin. You see a state like Wisconsin, you say there's opportunity here, and we see it. We're surrounded on all sides. Again, Randy said how much revenue is being generated by states around us that have legalized recreational cannabis. We're surrounded by it. What are we waiting for?
Mhm. Right, right. Well, I guess Iowa's not there, and you'll beat them to the table at some point. But
We'll
what are you
probably
waiting
beat
for?
them,
What
but
are
they're
people waiting for? I
I don't
feel like states oftentimes they're waiting for to figure out, how are we going to make sure that the right people make money off of this, and
know.
that's what can't be. What I encourage politicians to do regularly is to recognize that cannabis is way more popular than they are, right? And they should never underestimate the support that's among their constituents, even their older constituents. They are recognizing that this is safer than opioids. It is more effective than most medications. People aren't dumb anymore. Like they're watching the documentaries that are out there proving that this is medicine.
Right.
Um, so people want this and they want it now. It's important. I think that we give that to the people, and governments that are trying to, like Representative Voss, was it, I believe, in Wisconsin, was trying to block some of this, the language that you put forward in the state, and it's just ridiculous. It is really a lack of understanding, and a serious lack of compassion, and most definitely a lack of leadership.
And so
And that's
what do people need to understand? So the people that are on the other end of the aisle from you, the Robin
Mhm.
Bosses, or people that feel the
Mhm.
same, that are like, no way, not in my backyard, right?
Mhm.
That might have, let's just separate medical and recreational for now. Let's
Mhm.
just say
Mhm.
medical.
Mhm.
What are some of the concerns that people have about medical marijuana? What's the truth, and what are the benefits, especially for the veteran community or anyone that's struggling from post-traumatic stress or pain or whatever?
Sure. Well, I would say that one of the concerns is that it's a dangerous drug.
Hmm.
Because we've been lied to for over 87 years and being told that it's just dangerous, it's reefer
Mhm.
madness, and it's a gateway drug onto something more and more dangerous, even though
Is that not true?
that is absolutely not true. That it could be a gateway to access to more dangerous drugs, especially if you're purchasing it from somewhere in the illicit market where people
Mm.
are selling anything that makes money, to include marijuana that is untested, to include opioids that they've shipped in from China off of the dark web, or to include anything else, right?
Meth made
Or,
in the
or just
backwoods.
prescription medications that have been funneled into the black market community.
Right.
Cannabis is safer than sugar. Cannabis is safer than most anything in your medicine cabinet. There is
Alcohol.
no, oh, by far, alcohol. Alcohol is the most dangerous drug in the world and the most deadly drug in the world. 100,000 Americans will die from complications with alcohol this year, and that's not including car crashes. I'm talking alcohol-related
Health.
illnesses.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Cigarettes, 50,000 people will die from that this year, and those health
More
issues.
people die from alcohol than cigarette use?
Absolutely, absolutely. The
I'm
CD, at
shocked to
least
hear
that's
that.
according to the CDC. You said I'm the expert of experts, but I'm not the expert of anything. But I do know how to look stuff up on the internet, and the
There you go.
CDC says that.
Well, that puts you a step ahead of a lot of people, because people like to say, do your research, and then they don't research, or they say, like, you know, scholarly peer-reviewed data is fake or
Mhm.
whatever. So at least you do your research. That puts you a cut above the rest there.
Sure. So, and I would also say, people are also often concerned that cannabis businesses in their neighborhood will make it dangerous. Bad
Right.
people are going to be hanging around there. And what we found in the end is it's the exact opposite. The
Right.
exact opposite, because of the level of security that's associated with a dispensary or even a manufacturing or cultivation facility. These places become more safe than before, than in an unregulated and a prohibition market. And not to mention, within that, you're creating jobs within the community. I mean, was it Colorado? I think in the first 2 or 3 years of opening, they created 35,000 jobs.
Whoa.
Yeah, yeah,
And
that's
there's
a
a lot
big
of money in
deal.
that industry too. So
Mhm.
there are good paying jobs in there, from labor wage all the way up to management. So what are the benefits medically? How does it help? Let's say I have PTSD. Let's say I have pain.
Mhm.
What does marijuana do that my muscle relaxers don't?
Well, okay. Well, first and foremost, your muscle relaxers work on your central nervous system, right? Which, if your central nervous system shuts down or becomes paralyzed because of overusage, then you die.
Mhm.
Because it works also on your non-voluntary muscles. So your heart and your lungs stop working. And if you don't get Narcan in you or something like that, then you die. Whereas cannabis works on what we know now is called the endocannabinoid system, right? And for anyone who doesn't know what the endocannabinoid system is, it is a system that we've only recently discovered in the mid 90s.
Mm.
In Israel, this was discovered, and now it's been confirmed and widely accepted around the globe. But the endocannabinoid system is a system as important as our central nervous system, endocrine system, cardiovascular system, and all of that. And cannabinoids, the therapeutic compounds that are associated with the cannabis plant, they click in to this endocannabinoid system on two separate types of receptors that are all around our body, to include
Mhm.
in our brain and in our muscles, and it brings our body to stasis. What we recognize now is, with more access to cannabis and cannabis products, people's mood, metabolism, pain levels, sleep, all of it equalizes and comes into stasis. And so I think that is just something that is really worthy of further exploration and
Mm.
research. And
And there is
research,
scholarly
I do
research
want to get to
behind
that.
this.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah, tons of scholarly articles that are out, mostly from around the globe, because since 1970, when the Controlled Substances Act was created with the creation of the war on drugs by the Nixon administration, we've been unable to research cannabis for anything
Mm.
that is not for the purposes of finding the negative effects of it.
Interesting.
Yeah,
So
so yeah,
we've
so
been
it's.
really hamstrung by federal policy to not even explore what any of the benefits could possibly be. And are you trying to
Mhm,
tell me that I'm a complete novice here?
mhm.
That there is a I have receptors in my body whose express purpose is to receive what is in marijuana
I am.
and process it?
I am trying to tell you that, and I'm trying to tell you that those molecules already exist in our body. Our body creates these. One of them is called anandamide, right? And
Okay.
that gives like a pleasurable experience. And then the other one is called 2AG. The AG stands for something I can't quite pronounce, but our body processes and creates those naturally,
Mhm.
and cannabis is just another form of that, right?
Interesting.
Plus, cannabis also has the added complexity of terpenes, right? So cannabinoids are this medical compound within them. You've heard of delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol or CBD, cannabidiol. Everyone knows this now.
Yep.
Well,
Yeah.
you also have terpenes, which add to the impact and the effects of cannabis when consumed in this process that has now been dubbed the entourage effect, which was brought about by a guy named Dr. Raphael Mechoulam, an Israeli doctor who was the first to isolate THC and the first to discover the endocannabinoid system. But what we know now is that all of those work synergistically, the terpenes and the cannabinoids, to have a particular impact on a consumer. That's what we really need to dig into. And that's why I work so hard to create a platform for research and development. And I'm happy to share with you today the progress that we're making on that too.
I definitely do want to get to that. How does it help veterans specifically? What needs do veterans have that medical marijuana will solve or replace, or what are the solutions here?
Sure.
And we're still strictly talking medical.
Please. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, I know you know this, being a veteran, and you probably have friends who are in the scenario, but we are in the midst of a massive health crisis within the veteran community, right? One of the most respected communities, one of the smallest communities, less than 1% of Americans have ever served. But we have a great deal of respect. But within that community, we have a very elevated rate of suicide. We all know the number of 22 veterans a day are going to decide to put a pistol in their mouth and end it all. 10 more, you may not know this, but 10 more a day will overdose on some form of opioid or other addictive product that they've likely gained this addiction from their experience in the military, or are being supported in that addiction through medicine being provided by the VA. Those are two main issues: the opioid crisis and the PTSD suicide crisis that we're experiencing. But beyond that, I would also say that military personnel suffer a significant amount of traumatic brain injuries, especially within the Army, because of the IEDs, or the improvised explosive devices that we experience sometimes downrange, which cause traumatic brain injuries. We know now. Well, I guess the U.S. government's known it since the mid-90s, since they patented cannabinoids to serve as a neuroprotectant, an anti-inflammatory, and an antioxidant. We know now that we should be able to apply cannabis to that particular thing, right? That's why we created the Athena protocol. I know we've spoken about that before. That's our strategy to mitigate and treat traumatic brain injury using non-impairing cannabinoids. Where our proposal is really for soldiers to be utilizing non-impairing cannabinoids like CBD downrange, right, in combat, so that they can maximize the neuroprotection, neuroplasticity within the brain in preparation for the potential of traumatic brain injury through an IED. There are 3 follow-on phases to the Athena protocol, where the second phase would be administered at the point of injury, right? As part of, you probably recall the training part of buddy aid, after you have an attack of some
Self-aid,
sort,
buddy care?
self-aid and buddy care, you're going to establish security, and then you're going to gather your wounded and you're going to begin to treat them. Well, what we're proposing is that as part of that treatment, we would be able to give perhaps a sublingual tincture, or a transdermal patch. There we go. Yeah, it's so useful. And so we could spray it up people's noses. We could put it under the tongue. We know that cannabinoids pass the blood-brain barrier very, very rapidly. And if we could begin the anti-inflammatory process and the neuroprotective process immediately after an injury, we might be able to save some soldiers' lives. The third phase is kind of doctor administered in a Role 1 hospital in combat. And then the fourth phase is really the key to it, right? This is the rehabilitative phase, where we propose the use of the full spectrum of the plant to include THC to enhance physical therapy and talk therapy. And, if a soldier is no longer able to serve, I would consider it also as part of job therapy, or a potential for job therapy, where a soldier could learn to grow their own medicine and or work in the cannabis industry following their departure from the service.
There's a lot to unpack there, but I just want to ask, before we go to recreational, so I want to make sure we cover that too. This is an important question. as far as traumatic brain injury, which is very prevalent, as you said, in especially infantry, foot soldiers, in the area of traumatic brain injury, so you're saying that non-impairing medical marijuana products, non-impairing, have been proven to help against the short and long-term effects of traumatic brain injury, and the government knew about this and patented it in the mid-90s?
That's correct. You can look it up. It is patent number 6630507.
So why are we just throwing pills at our veterans then, opioids instead? So you're saying this is also a valid, it could be potentially an opioid replacement. It could be
yeah,
why?
it could increase the survivability of our soldiers in combat. It could increase the ability of veterans to thrive after service. And don't forget, when I talk about veterans or military personnel, I'm also considering their families, right? Because that is one thing that we are, as a family unit. And today in the military, there are soldiers who are trying to make the decision of whether or not to stay in the military, continue to serve, or to get out of the military so that they or one of their family members can access medical cannabis to treat, a wide array of issues that have developed, right? Could you imagine still serving, if you were still in uniform, and say you have a brand new child and they have Dravet syndrome, right? Intractable epilepsy, like Charlotte Figi did, you may recall from the Charlotte's Web story. And, you're serving in uniform, and the military doctors that you're seeing are only giving you options and only access to traditional pharmaceutical FDA approved medicine that from knowing these people doesn't do it, just doesn't cut it. But
rather than THC, which has been proven to have a positive effect on epilepsy, Parkinson's, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, all neurodegenerative disorders. Yeah. So that's happening. We're forcing people into this, very bad situation where they have to make that decision. They either break the law and then they get kicked out with a dishonorable discharge, or they just get out on their own and then go on and have access. And I don't think that is a good situation for us to put our service members or their family members in.
So we can not only, so we have a currently controlled substance right now that we know, this isn't about getting high, by the way. That part is not part of this. This isn't about getting high. This is about that can in a non-habit forming fashion solve all these issues for our veterans in and out of service and their family members. And the government / military knows that that's a fact, and we still haven't been able to close the gap and make that happen. So that's super duper frustrating. And for those of you that aren't aware, I mean, there's a long history to try to keep that in place because other people, I guess, are making money. But so let's talk about the other end. Let's talk about getting high. Let's talk about recreational legalization.
Let's do. But first, I do want to finalize that with saying that this is absolutely a failure of leadership at the highest levels, right? And the scenarios that I'm trying to create are where I'm trying to put military leaders still serving and recently served in the same rooms with medical cannabis experts who are physicians, as well as VA doctors, and get to what right looks like, right? Have leadership speaking to those VA doctors about how we get to how we move to a future where cannabis is accessible and is, as I said, increasing the survivability of our soldiers in combat and providing a really effective treatment for some of the injuries that we sustain while in combat.
Are they listening? 10 years ago, they brushed you off. Are they listening now?
I think they're starting to listen. Yeah, the VA is starting to listen. I've now gained the support of, I know someone that mentioned the American Legion and other VSOs, all of who have said, we need more research. There we go. We need more research. And that's true. We do need more research, but we have enough now to state that this product is first and foremost safe, right? Because we do no harm in the medical community. It is also effective based on the inputs of all of the veterans that I'm talking to, this guy, and thousands and thousands of others.
Thousands. Yep.
I can't tell you how many veterans have looked at me and said, this plant saved my life. This saved my life. It also saved my marriage. And, I'm a much better person for having been able to access this now. So
Right.
It's a dereliction of duty for the Department of Defense to understand the efficacy and the safety of this and the potential that this plant has, and not research it,
and
right?
not pull the trigger.
Mm-mm.
Are they worried about abuse, recreational use? Where is that line drawn? If we have service members that clearly have it in their system for non-recreational use purposes, wouldn't they technically fail your analysis right next to a person that has recreational use in their system? How do they tell the difference? Are there better tests that can tell the difference, or shouldn't they test at all? Let's talk about the
I don't know if there's a test yet that tells whether or not you had fun while you were taking your drugs, but or whether or not it was being used to apply to your back pain. But
fair enough.
But yeah, I think we got to get rid of that test in general, right?
Just
that
gone.
Test that you cannot judge someone's ability to perform by what's in their pee. Period. It takes leadership, and that's why. See, it makes for lazy leaders. They're like, well, I made all my soldiers pee in a cup, and no one came up hot for weed, so we must be good to go, right? Well, in fact,
meanwhile, they're drinking 7 days a week. They're showing up hungover, more hungover than all get out, and
smoking spice. They'll do anything that's not going to show up in their urinalysis. So it's really a false dichotomy, and it makes it more dangerous. I mean, you saw my tweet about Representative Voss here the other day. When he is blocking marijuana reform in Wisconsin, and it makes the drug problem worse. And we have to get to that
reform in the state of Wisconsin. I feel as if the movement has made strides towards medical, but I feel like we're a long way away from the recreational end of things. Am I understanding that correctly? And is there a way to separate those two? Do we just need to go all the way? And let's talk about Wisconsin and where we're at with all that.
Yeah, sure. Well, only one state, South Dakota, has approved both medical and adult use at the same time. And I haven't followed it very closely, but by all accounts, I don't think that it's going very well by doing that. I think states typically are smarter to dip their toe in the water with a medical cannabis program, and you get the basis of the industry in place, and you get those who are in most need access to it faster. Right. I would also encourage states that are just moving into medical cannabis legalization to be engaged with their bordering states that already have medical cannabis or adult use cannabis, and start working on a deal to where they can start importing across those state lines. This is happening on the West Coast between Washington, Oregon, and California, and I think it's very smart. And as we approach federal legalization, this will give them a leg up too in the future trade of American cannabis among the states and interstate.
So you're saying it would be advantageous for any state to go medical first and not medical and recreational at the same time. So would you say then it would be advantageous for Wisconsin to get medical situated before there's a federal thing that just legalizes recreational across the board?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that's the way to go, because taking on adult use and medical simultaneously is a lot for one state to swallow.
It's a lot,
right?
Yeah.
And it's going to take a lot. I mean, it takes really heavy cooperation and input from the state. Now, I'll give you an example. So let me tell you about my state. Let me tell you where I am in the show me state. I'm very proud of the legalization for medical cannabis that we've put forward here. It passed in 2018. For my money, we have the best medical cannabis program in the country. for a couple of different reasons. First and
That's
foremost,
in
Missouri, in the
Missouri.
state of
Okay, good.
Missouri, right? And
I'm
I'm
reading your
currently,
website here to go across the bottom, by the way, here.
oh, cool,
Randy just shared it. So yeah,
very cool.
let's talk about
And
Missouri.
yeah, and by the way, I'm also heavily in the process of legalizing medical cannabis in the state of Kansas now.
Nice.
Okay, yeah. So
So
and I
Missouri and
think,
Kansas is currently light years ahead of Wisconsin.
well, Missouri is. Missouri
Missouri. Okay.
certainly is. Kansas is. You're ahead of Kansas, I would say.
Okay. Well, that's something, I guess.
Yeah. But so in Missouri, here's why we have the best medical cannabis program. We have a 4% tax rate, which is the lowest in the country. And that means that people can have access to cannabis here because we have a huge list of qualifying conditions, right? That includes everything from chronic pain to PTSD, Crohn's, and everything on down to the magic bullet. The magic bullet puts the relationship back into the hands of a medical professional. If your doctor in Missouri thinks that medical cannabis might be right for you, they can provide you a recommendation, right? So, and those doctors are doing a great job at it. We don't have the doc in a box scenario like we had in California back in the day, where anyone who had some sort of medical professional was just signing off $50 a pop for everyone to get access. We're really taking a much more medical approach to it. Access is big in Missouri. We will have 60 cultivators, 86 manufacturers, and 192 dispensaries equally distributed across the state. We're currently at about 50% operational right now because we're only a little over a year into our legalization process. But we've got cannabis flowing. We've got dispensaries coming up all over the place. I have a medical cannabis card. We have 80,000 patients already registered in the state, and that's a good thing. The other piece about Missouri's program is that 4% tax that I spoke of. Those taxes are used to run the program, and everything left over goes to veterans and veterans programs that help veterans to prevent veteran homelessness, to promote veteran education, to promote veteran employment, all kinds of programs that can access those funds. So that's really good stuff. And, it's because of that, and it's because of the strength of the industry in Missouri, and it's because of the strength of the relationship between the industry in Missouri and the Missouri government that we're doing a great job. And that's why I have proposed to the VA to utilize Missouri as a test platform, a pilot project to research pain and how medical cannabis can address pain among the veteran population through the collection of data, through the collection of commentary and responses from veterans who are making this transition, through the use of metrics such as the number of opioids used or the number of medications that they're able to pull themselves back off of, and things of that nature. And we've received a very positive response from the VA, so much so that they've said you need to find a primary investigator that works for the VA in Missouri that would be able to be your primary investigator for this research proposal. So last week, I did have a great conversation with VA doctors at the Kansas City VA.
Nice.
Yeah, it's nice, but they're a little overwhelmed. They also think maybe they're getting the wool pulled over their eyes or something.
Right. There's 100 years of misinformation and skepticism that's built around
and there's
it.
a huge education gap that is held with those medical professionals, right? They don't know what the endocannabinoid system, they don't know what a cannabinoid is, they don't know all of the different methods of administration, and they don't know any of the stories of people whose lives have been positively impacted by this plant. So I'm trying to change that, first and foremost by putting together an educational forum that would bring in physicians who are also medical cannabis professionals, with VA doctors who aren't quite yet medical cannabis professionals but care deeply about the veteran community, and leadership into the same room to talk about this, what it means now, what it has meant historically, that's why I'm on a really unique piece of terrain currently, and this is why I've chosen to have the fight here. All right, because just across the river in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, we have the Army, one of the Army's premier leadership institutions,
Mm-hmm.
that understands what a revolution in military affairs is, and we'll be able to understand what a revolution in medical affairs could be. And so it's a pretty unique scenario, and it's a great program that we have here. And I'd love to help Wisconsin in any way, kind of develop their language around the industry that will eventually develop. Because you know, I think Wisconsin will come to its senses very soon and recognize that everyone else is doing it and everyone else is benefiting from this. The
Right.
sky hasn't fallen in any of the states where we've legalized medical cannabis.
Well, there's still a lot of narratives, that are negative about it, but you can't argue with the tax revenue, and I would encourage everybody to have a positive, open-minded dialogue on both ends. I feel like I could talk to you for 2 more hours, but we do need to round third here. Um, let's bring it on home with Wisconsin. So you've done all this amazing work in Missouri. How does somebody advocate for this here in the state of Wisconsin? How does somebody get in on this industry in the state of Wisconsin? How does somebody learn more about this industry in the state of Wisconsin? What's the next step for our state if you are looking to support this?
Right. So first and foremost, I would say become an advocate. I am still an advocate. That was the first thing I came in doing. Look up your local NORML chapter. NORML is the oldest cannabis activist organization in the country. It started in 1970, the same year the war began. Stands for the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. There's also a really great organization called Minorities for Medical Marijuana. That
Mm-hmm.
is an exceptional one for folks to be involved in, and start knocking on doors, start telling your story of why you support cannabis, and in order to prepare for the industry, because there is no industry currently in Wisconsin except for the illegal industry. But in order to prepare for the industry, you have to start researching it and studying it and understanding it and how it works from seed to sale. Like, understand how it's been working in other legal states, right? Because now it gets tracked from the seed to the sale of the product and back. And so there's a huge amount of compliance and regulation that goes into the cannabis industry, because it's very regulated like pharma or alcohol, but more, right? We
Mm-hmm.
have to,
Oh,
for
I'd
some
imagine.
reason, yeah, we have to treat this plant like it's plutonium or something, and we have to really like maintain contact with every single gram that we produce or
Mm-hmm.
distribute.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So grassroots, pound the pavement advocacy, call your politician, your speaker, your senator, your governor, and talk about how maybe not just
Mhm.
that. If you don't or your family doesn't want to use it, that doesn't mean that there aren't people in your community that you served with that couldn't benefit greatly from it, and could
Certainly.
use your voice as well. So
Yeah. Well,
it
you
doesn't
most
look like.
certainly know an aunt or a parent that could probably use it, right? Even if you don't want to use it, I
Absolutely.
guarantee it makes everyone a cooler person,
Yeah.
and a much much happier person in general.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. Understand like who really needs this. Please feel free to, instead of saying thank you for your service to a veteran, just tell a leader or a decision maker to legalize medical cannabis, because again, you cannot be anti-medical cannabis and be pro-veteran at the same time. It just doesn't work.
Wow. Well, you've given us a lot to chew on here today, Todd. And like I said, we may have to just have you again. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of follow-up comments and questions. Would love to have you on again. The state of Wisconsin thanks you and for the information that you've been able to provide to all of us. We thank you for the information you've been able to provide to our constituents and followers and whatnot, folks. If you have any follow-up questions, comments, concerns, connect with the Wisconsin Veterans Chamber of Commerce, or you can learn more about Todd and Harvest 360. You can see that harvest360.co, just like scrolling across the bottom there. Give it a follow. Todd, I appreciate it, my man. I'll ask you to hang on the line for just a minute here. All right. Man, that was a lot of good information. So I'm curious, have any of you had your minds changed? Have any of you are you firmly more rooted than in your camp, or have you changed your mind? Are you still on the fence? Is there more you need to learn about? Like I said, not a lot of lukewarm opinions about this, and we want to hear from you. All right. So go to our handy link tree link, follow us across all platforms, send us a message any old which way, and we will look forward to seeing you again every week, 11:30 a.m. Central, here for our office hours. So we're going to see you next time.